welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Laurie Elizabeth Flynn is a writer and former model who lives in London, Ontario with her husband and their 4 children. She's the author of 3 young adult novels under the name L.E. Flynn. Her adult fiction debut, The Girls Are All So Nice Here, was named a USA Today Best Book of 2021, sold in 11 territories worldwide, and became an instant bestseller in Canada. Her highly anticipated second adult novel, Till Death Do Us Part, is out now. When Laurie's not writing, you can likely find her hiking in the woods, perusing thrift stores for vintage dresses, or binging on reality TV dating shows. Laurie Elizabeth Flynn, thank you so much for being here. I am very excited to talk with you about your new novel, Till Death Do Us Part. Booklist says Till Death Do Us Part is taut, twisty, multiple suspenseful, unexpected twists and turns later. The truth, dark, tragic, and shocking, emerges. Author Marissa Staveley says, featuring a labyrinthine plot that's as twisty as grapevines and as complex as good wine, this novel kept me guessing until the very end. Suspenseful, sexy, gritty, and empowering. Author May Cobb says, with prose as decadent and sumptuous as the sun-drenched Napa Valley vineyard in which it's set, Till Death Do Us Part is Laurie Elizabeth Flynn at the height of her powers. Sultry, enthralling, and utterly unput-downable, it's not only a heart-pounding suspense novel, but also a heart-wrenching exploration of grief, motherhood, marriage, and the redemptive hope of second chances. And author Samantha Bailey says, through every genius twist and turn, Flynn had me in a chokehold, unable to put the book down until I ripped through every delicious page. Seductive, addictive, and penetrating, this domestic thriller will set you ablaze. So with that, I could go on, but we'll let you talk. What can you tell us about Till Death Do Us Part?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it, and thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today. So, Till Death Do Us Part centers on June. June is a widow who is newly engaged again, 10 years after losing the love of her life on their honeymoon. So, her first husband drowned on their honeymoon, but his body was never found. It took her a very long time to move on, but finally she's with somebody, she's happy, she's engaged, she's planning her wedding. And then at her engagement photo shoot, she sees her first husband, Josh, in the park. And she goes running after him, but then he disappears. And she convinces herself that it's just a trick of the mind. It's just her grief and her guilt, sort of guilt over moving on, catching up with her. And so she writes it off. But then she sees him again outside of her natural wine bar in Brooklyn. And again, writes it off as, my mind is playing tricks on me. But when she starts to research honeymoon destinations, and she is on a website for a family-owned winery in Napa, she sees a picture of a man who looks identical to Josh, and so he has a different name, and he is married to a different woman. And now that the proof is in front of her, she cannot just write it off so easily. So she flies to Napa, secretly flies there to find answers. But what she uncovers are some shocking family secrets that kind of upend everything and make her question whether everything she knew about the first love of her life might have been a lie.
What was the spark that got this story started for you?
Oh boy, I think it was just a combination of different things. I had a lot of false starts with this novel. It didn't come
Mhm.
together easily. I knew that I had this character, June, who was going to be a widow, and having found out that some things, I'm trying to talk without spoilers here, trying to find out some secrets about the person she thought she knew and the person that she loved. And I really wanted to play with that. And so that was, I think, kind of the spark. And then the
Mhm.
story kind of took shape from there. And I had the perspective of Josh's mother in the past. So June's timeline takes place in the present, but then in the past, there's a 1999 timeline that takes place with Josh's mother, Bev, and it sort of tells the story of the family and the things that kind of tore the family apart back. And it's interesting. I really wanted to explore how Bev's storyline impacted June in the present, even though this woman was only her mother-in-law for like a week in total. And I think she
Mhm.
met her like one time before she and Josh eloped. The decisions that this woman made had so much to do with what happened. So I really love that, how the past and present can be so intertwined. And I also love the idea of one woman trying to figure out the secrets of the past. So that's June, and then
Mhm.
Bev at the same time in her own timeline is trying to figure out her future. So I thought that would be an interesting dichotomy, but still having parallels between the two women's storylines, like can you have more than one great love of your life? And second chances, regret. So some of the things about their stories parallel each other, but even though they're very different. So I really wanted to play around with that.
Yeah, and I think that the two perspectives and the dual timeline work really beautifully with this structure. Um, and I wanted to ask you about that. Did you sort of know early on that you were going to use that structure for the novel, the two perspectives and the dual timeline, or did that evolve as you were exploring the story?
Yeah, so it definitely evolved. I knew I wanted two different narrators in the story,
Mhm.
but at first I didn't have Bev as the second narrator, and the book just was not working.
Mhm.
I originally had Sadie as a second narrator, but it just wasn't working. And so as soon as Bev was introduced, things sort of started to fit together. But I definitely knew I wanted a dual narrative and one timeline being in the past.
Mhm.
So, but it just wasn't working the way it was. And once it came together with Bev, it felt very, very much right. So it was one of those stories that I kind of wrote my way into the wrong way a couple times. It took that sort of figuring out what didn't work to figure out what
Mhm.
did work with the book. And I didn't even have the vineyard setting at first. It had a
Oh, wow.
suburban setting, and it just was not feeling right. As soon as the vineyard setting came in, it suddenly the story clicked. And
Mhm.
that I think that was just the missing piece. So I can't imagine it now without the vineyard setting. Like the whole book revolves around it. So it was just, the missing piece that the book needed to become cohesive.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that vineyard setting because as we've said, much of the book takes place in the Napa Valley on the vineyards. There is so much winemaking and so much wine, as we heard in the blurbs. We're immersed in this world, and the details are so vivid. So, do you have a background in winemaking?
I do not. I did a lot of research for this story to kind of make sure it felt authentic. So
That
it
must
was
have been fun.
really, it was so fun. It was like, because I already had an interest, and I'm a wine drinker, I'm a wine lover. So
Mhm.
it was a big interest of mine. So getting to research it for the book was really fun. And also to taste test some wines, of course, to be able to describe them. So that was really fun. I definitely did most of that research between the first and second draft. So my first draft was very much like a skeleton draft just to get the bones of the plot in place.
Mhm.
And the wine details and all that information was added in between, like in my second draft pretty much, because I'm the type of writer, I can't research as I go because I just end up getting bogged down in so many details or falling into so many internet rabbit holes. And then I just don't make progress forward. So I knew what I needed to do was just write the draft, get the bones of the plot down, and then go back in and sort of figure out the details. And I left myself so many blanks and like little brackets, like add details here. And then I kind of went in on the research, and it was really fun. I loved it. So
How
it
did
was
you conduct the research?
it was all books and online. Like I didn't go to a winery until near the end. And that was really interesting. I'm glad I did go near the end because I kind of had all this knowledge from my research, and I was able to kind of fact check things for myself and figure out if I had it right or not. So it was that was really fun. But I didn't go to Napa. I haven't been to Napa, so I'm going on my book tour, and I'm really, really excited about that because I feel like it's going to be so surreal to. I feel like I've spent so much time there in my imagination,
Hmm.
but it was also fun being able to do all that research into Napa. It was like 2022 when I was working on this, and it's like COVID time to just kind of things were still a little weird. And
Yeah.
I also had four very young kids at home. So it was the travel, it was pretty hard. So it was fun to sort of escape there in my mind and imagine being there. So I'm excited to actually go there.
Yeah. This is certainly a twisty suspense novel, but as we've alluded to, it also takes a hard look at the expected sacrifices of womanhood. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that was something I knew I needed to be at the core of this story. And I think Bev's storyline, I really wanted to dive deep into motherhood and what that looks like for somebody. And this is a woman who wanted to have a family of her own, but then kind of struggles once she does and questions her own instincts. So I thought that would be interesting to explore in a book how not every woman might feel like a natural mother, and what that looks like for Bev. She just wants to be unlike her parents. So she grew up in a tumultuous household. It's so
Mhm.
important for her to try to keep her family together at all costs, even though there's all these forces that are kind of tearing them apart. And she's growing apart from her husband in her marriage. And there's so much pressure on her. She feels like she needs to stay and she needs to do things a certain way because she's the cornerstone of this family, and she needs to keep the family together, and she can't have this broken childhood for her kids like the ones she grew up with. But then she kind of comes to this realization that it's broken where they are, even though they're physically together. Things have
Mhm.
already broken. So I wanted to explore that. And I also wanted to sort of, it was important to me that things go a certain way for Bev, and that I think there's a lot of stories where women make the sacrifice for their families and for their kids at the expense of their own happiness. And I didn't want it to go that way for Bev. So I won't have any spoilers as to what happens, but that was really important to me in the story. I think there are so many sacrifices expected of women. I think Bev's resentment kind of grows over time. She feels like she gave up a lot, and maybe she didn't even realize it at the time because she got married so young. Like she had aspirations that she kind of buried once she had a family. And I think a lot of times we're just sort of expected to be okay with that. And um, in this book, I kind of wanted to show like it's okay for a woman to want things just for herself, and it's good, and it's normal, and it's healthy. She wants to. There's things that she wants that are outside of her family and her children and her marriage, and I wanted her to really pursue that.
Yeah. There are also love stories in this novel in many forms. Um, why do you think it's important to show that tenderness and warmth, even in a thriller?
I love when thriller books have very fleshed out like character development and relationships between characters. So I knew I really wanted that here. And I also loved the idea of like a thriller that's also a romantic novel, because I think that's just very enticing. That's like, I would pick that up in a heartbeat. So that's kind of what I tried to write here, because it's like, just because it's a thriller doesn't mean it also can't be a love story or more than one love stories. And in this case, I feel like the love stories really kind of anchored the book, and they were so much fun to write. And I really wanted to toy with the idea of, do you get one great love of your life, or can you love more than one person? Is there one true love out there for everyone, or can you fall in love deeply with more than one person and have that second chance that you thought you gave up all those years ago? So I think Bev and June both grapple with that in different ways.
Yeah.
They both feel like they've lost the first love of their life in different ways, and the evolution of their feelings from that and how that changes them. So I really wanted to kind of explore that. I think love stories are just so universal. Like and everyone's got different experiences with them. But I wanted to kind of write something that would be relatable to women as well, and have explore that through these two different characters. But in general, I just love a romantic love story thriller that has that sort of sense of a big romance and depth in it. So I really wanted to convey that in this book. It was very important to me. So, and it was just really fun.
Yeah. And you've done it very well. Why why are you drawn to writing thrillers? And what drew you particularly to the domestic thriller?
I think I just have a very dark mind. I just whenever I like get a book idea, sometimes I'm like, oh, I could write like a non-thriller, but then I like my brain will like think of, oh, but what if there was a murder? Or like what if there was something, some deep dark secret? And I don't know, I just feel like that's how my brain works. I kind of gravitate toward these like dark kind of twists. And I also love to read thrillers and watch this kind of material on TV, because I love to try to guess what's happening, and I love being surprised. And I love that feeling when a twist has been pulled off that I didn't see coming, and I can go back in a second read or a second watch and sort of see the breadcrumbs leading up to it. I think that's, if it's done well, I'm just always so impressed. And I think for me though, those thrillers and those twists, they have to feel like they're earned. They can't just be there for shock value. I feel like so that all comes back to characters and character motivation. So that's always when I'm writing what I'm thinking about. I'm like, how, like, because I think anything can be kind of believable and a reader will understand it, but it has to feel true to the character. So you have to have created a character that the reader will be able to, even if they can't relate to them, at least sort of understand why they did what they did.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think in terms of like the domestic kind of thriller, or that I'm just obsessed with like anything that's a family drama, family secrets, relationships between in a marriage, or between just friends, or a mother and her children. I just find that there's so much material there that you can mine. The way resentment might breed, or the secret somebody might be keeping from somebody else, or one lie somebody told that has this huge reverberating effect. I feel like there's so much of this in just in a household, or in a neighborhood, or between one family or two families. So I'm like endlessly fascinated by all of those dynamics. So I feel like I'm never going to tire of exploring that.
There's a lot of material.
Yes, so much.
How do your characters come to you? I'm always interested because it seems like there are so many different answers to this. Some people say that their characters kind of come into their minds almost like full people, and others are sort of fleshed out on the page. How does it work for you?
I think for me, it's kind of a mixture of both. Sometimes I have to write my way into a character. I'm
Mm.
not somebody who does like a ton of planning ahead of time. So I will generally get to know my character as I write. But that said, I do a lot of revising. So I will learn about that character, and I kind of know once I've reached a point where I'm like, oh, she wouldn't do that or she wouldn't say that. Like I know them very, very well. And if they were like if you were to plunk them in front of me in the real world, I would be able to tell you what sort of how they would react in a situation or what they would say or wouldn't say. So I feel like I know there's like different authors will do like questionnaires and different things about their characters. I don't do any of that, but I do a lot of work on their characters, I'd say between like the first draft and the second draft. My first drafts are usually a hot mess. They're very exploratory and I'm getting to know my characters and the story, but after that is when the real work comes in. I do feel like I'm the type of author who has a lot of ideas in my brain at once. So I even when something's on the back burner, it's sort of simmering. So I kind of get to know those characters before I even start writing in a way.
Interesting.
Because yeah, like I have like a zillion notes in my notes app on my phone, and it's all just different book ideas, any fragment of an idea. Or so generally a character will start out in my notes app, and then I'll sit with them in my brain for a while. And then when I've started writing, I'll sort of feel like I have a sense of them, and as I write more, I'll get to know them a little bit more. So that's kind of how June and Bev came to be.
What does your process look like? From you get a sort of kernel of an idea and it goes into the notes app. And then you said sort of messy first draft, but what does that look like from the start in the notes app to when you're handing in that last draft to be
Yeah.
published?
Yeah. Well, yeah, what I do is I keep so many like notes in my phone just and then when it comes to picking my next book idea, I kind of go through them all and I'm like, what excites me the most? And some of these are not something that could sustain a book. So I kind of go through and I'm like, what could I combine from these to sort of put together something that would carry a book through?
Hmm.
Or is this not enough? And or so I kind of play around with that. Once I have a sort of general idea, the most important part of my process is finding the hook of the story. And I will spend a lot of time on that. And I'll generally write like a what's akin to like a blurb that would go on the back cover of a book, like you'd see in a bookstore. I try to write something like that out and I'll send it to my agent and we'll play around with it to try to really chisel down to that hook because I think that's the most important thing.
Mhm.
Like, and I need to be able in my own head to pitch this book in an elevator pitch. Otherwise, I don't truly know what it's about. That's what I tell myself anyway. Like, what would if somebody asked me what my book was about, would I stumble over it awkwardly or would I be able to kind of give like a couple sentences of an elevator pitch with a strong enough hook that somebody would be hopefully compelled to want to read it? So once I kind of narrow that down, it also helps me as I'm drafting because if I start to kind of go off in random directions, I can sort of go back to that pitch I've written and be like, oh, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be focusing on. This is the hook. So see if I've kind of lost that direction or not. When I do start drafting, I'm a very fast drafter. It's the only way I can get anything done. I sort of try to write a first draft very quickly within like 6 weeks, just because
Wow.
well, I want to get that momentum and get through to the end. And then the real journey starts with revision. I'm a big reviser, so I generally print off the book in a hard copy and then I mark it up and then I go back into my Word document and start the painful process of revising it. And generally with drafting so fast, there's a lot of mess to clean up. I also am a very I'm an overdrafter. I will draft very long books. So there's a lot of trimming, a lot of stuff ends up on the cutting room floor, but I don't see that as a waste. For me, it's all exploratory. It's all stuff that like didn't need to go in the book, but I needed to write it to get to know my characters and their story and to kind of also eliminate like, okay, this wasn't the right direction to take. So that's okay. Now I know. So I don't really see those words as a waste. That's just the way my process goes. And then I will generally revise. My agent is very editorial, so we will revise together and then revise with my editors. And then that lovely moment where it gets to go to copy edits and most of the bigger work is done and I can sort of focus on the line level, which I love. And yeah, it's always so crazy to me. Like when I hold the book that I've written, I remember all the versions that it was and those messy versions on my computer that like those earliest drafts that no one will ever see because they were just so messy. But that's just, and I remind myself of that all the time because sometimes when you're drafting, you feel like your work sucks and you pick up a book on your shelf and compare your work to it. And I'm always like checking myself, like, don't do that because this was also once a sloppy first draft on somebody's computer. So I feel like all writers need to remember this.
That is such a great thing to remember. You started out writing YA. This is your Till Death Do Us Part is your second novel for an adult audience. Do you find that your process is very different in writing for an adult audience versus a young adult audience?
I feel like my process is the same, but it's what's different about YA for me is there's just this immediacy in the narrative that because it's all happening in such a condensed time frame usually. With my adult novels, I feel like there's so much more time for like retrospection and just looking back on the past and having that bigger breadth of time, like in Till Death Do Us Part, the narrators have like decades to look back on and sort of the decisions they made. Whereas in a YA book, if the narrator's like 17, they're not having that same, there's more of an immediacy in the narration for me. And which I enjoy. And it's kind of fun to toggle between YA and adult because they just have a very different vibe. I'd say my process for writing them is very much the same though, that terrible first draft and then all the revision that follows. So I would say it's similar process, but just a very different feeling as I'm writing it. And it is fun though, because it's fun to hop into the head of one character that's totally different than one of the other ones. But I think that's just yeah, process same, just the vibe is different.
How did you come to writing? Have you always been a writer?
Um, yes, for sure. I was totally one of those kids who was very much just like in my head, reading books all the time, writing. I remember back in the fourth grade, we'd have like these class exercises where you were supposed to write on a story on a piece of paper, except my stories would be like 10 pieces of paper and I'd have to keep going up and getting more pages. And I remember I wrote in my like school memory book that year that my parents had for me that I wanted to be a writer. And my mom wrote this sweet little note underneath it that was like, you can do whatever you put your mind to. And it was so cute. And so I feel like it was always there. However, like I think I sort of talked myself out of it when I was in university because I kind of deemed writing as not practical and not a practical career path. And what am I actually going to do? So I ended up in like I took a lot of English language and literature courses. I thought maybe I'd go into academia. Then I kind of realized that wasn't what I was passionate about. Then I went to school for journalism, and that was sort of the turning point where I realized that I did not want to do that. So it was kind of a lot of um, me kind of trying different things and realizing this is not for me. And then I kind of realized that what I wanted to do was write my own story. So I finally admitted that to myself and started writing, trying to write my own novels. And I had two failed attempts before the one that would eventually get published. So I think it was a learning curve, but it was fun and liberating to be able to admit to myself that that's what I wanted to do and try to make it happen.
What was the road to publication like for you?
Oh, it was yeah, I love hearing people's publication stories. So for me, I had my third novel I ever wrote was a young adult contemporary called Firsts, and that was my first published novel. It's back in 2016, which seems like so long ago, but it's crazy. It's like 8 years of that. Anyway. But I actually entered it in an online contest called Pitch Wars, and it got paired with a mentor, and then they had like a showcase where your agent stopped by, like an online showcase, and they might request pages. I didn't end up getting an agent from that contest, but I did query and get one. And then I had 3 young adult books published, and then I wrote The Girls Are Also Nice Here, and I kind of wanted my career to go in a different direction. So I actually found a new agent for that book, and it was from there I revised it with her and went on submission and got my book deal for The Girls Are Also Nice Here, and it was a 2-book deal. So Till Death Do Us Part is the second book in that contract. And that was a crazy whirlwind, and everything happened really fast, and it was very exciting. It was an auction, and it was just very surreal and exciting. And just knowing that my adult books were going to be published as well. So I think my road to publication, like, I was very lucky in a lot of ways, but there was also those 2 failed novels near the beginning. It was like over a year of querying, and that didn't get anywhere. So I know the agony of being in that stage, and trying to figure out what isn't working, and trying to figure out what I'm doing with this feedback, and some of it's subjective and some of it was so helpful. And I feel like there was times when I wanted to quit because it was, I just wasn't getting an offer. It was just, and it's heartbreaking to have to to shelve a book and say this isn't working. But I had that happen with those 2 first books. But now I look back on them as learning so much from them. And I feel like every writer kind of probably has a couple books like that in their drawer. So I feel like I learned a lot through the process, and I'm very fortunate to be here right now where I am.
I always wonder about the 2-book deal. Does that feel exciting, or does it feel like a lot of pressure for you? How does it feel?
That's a good question. For me, it feels both. So it's exciting because it's really cool. I feel like, wow, they want to commit to 2 of my books. This is amazing. Like, it's a show of support that I think is really great feeling. Definitely pressure. Like, it's the pressure I put on myself to try to, I want to write something better, even bigger and better than the first one, and really impress them. And there's definitely pressure there I think once you have a book published or that's in the process of being published, you're already thinking about your readers and like, what are they going to like for my next book? Like, so there's a lot of voices in your head, at least for me, that I'm sort of trying to contend with, but also to try to write the book that I want to write, and kind of block out the noise to get the book done. But so I think it's great and wonderful, and there's also that support, like, to people to bounce ideas around with, which is invaluable. So for me, that most of the pressure comes just from my own self and my perfectionism and wanting to make it the best I can possibly make it.
What do you know now that you wish you had known before you published that first book? Firsts.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things that I think one thing is, once you get a book published, it's not all just smooth sailing. And I used to think, once somebody gets published, everything's great and everything they write is like gold and everything will get published. And that's not been the case for me. Like, I've written books since then that have not been published. So I actually wrote a book in between The Girls Are Also Nice Here and Till Death Do Us Part that was maybe going to be the second book in my deal, but it just wasn't working. It just wasn't, there was something about it that wasn't clicking. And we spent a lot of time revising it and trying to make it work. and then it just wasn't working. And so I feel like these stories you don't hear them all that much, but I'm always wanting to be transparent about them because I think it always helps me as an author to feel like I'm not the only one. So
Yeah.
I would say just because you've had a book published does not mean everything else is going to get published automatically. So for me, that other book just wasn't what it needed to be. And I went back and started from scratch and wrote Till Death Do Us Part. And I'm so glad it turned out like that. As much as it's heartbreaking to shelve a book and say goodbye to it, it's everything is a learning experience. And I don't ever look at a book as a waste of time, because sometimes you need that book under your belt to be able to write the next book. At least that's been the case for me. I look back on those books that are still in my Word documents, and I'm grateful for them because I feel like they've taught me a lot. And I think the other thing I would want to tell my past self is, like, you can't control everything. You can only control your words and what you're writing. And there's a lot in publishing that's out of your control. So just try to, like, find the love in what you're doing, and not always looking for external validation for things, because it's so easy to compare yourself to people on social media, or to sort of look at yourself and feel like you're behind or something like that. But I think it's just all you can control is the words you put on the page and improving your own craft. So that's sort of what I would tell my past self, and also just tell any sort of aspiring writers as well.
I love that. It's wonderful advice. And thank you for sharing that about the second book in between that didn't work out, because I think it is important for people to hear that even successful authors who are out there doing it sometimes have things that just don't work, and that's fine. That's fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's just the nature of things.
Yep.
We have a traditional final question on this podcast, and it is, when Till Death Do Us Part is turned into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh my gosh. I love that question. I love, so I listened to a lot of Florence and the Machine while I was drafting this book. So I always, I listen to What Kind of Man a lot. So I don't know. I love that song as the theme song for this book. So I feel like I listened to it like 1,000 times as I was drafting and revising. I just love anything Florence and the Machine. So just that whole vibe, I feel like would be perfect.
It would be great. Laurie Elizabeth Flynn, thank you so much for coming on. It has been such a joy getting to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.